here's the schedule. Today's the 9th. And if you take a look, I have today and next week for chapter 20. That's because it's a very lengthy chapter, so I am not sure that we're going to be able to cover everything today. So next Sunday will also be chapter 20, and then we'll go on to 21, 22. Those chapters, I think, can be done in 2 Sundays, 2 meetings. Okay, so chapter 20. What I would like to do today is to, really work hard on this and to take everyone through this particular chapter. And I want to be very detailed about this particular one. Before we get into it, let me talk about the significance of this particular chapter. This chapter is essentially Lao Tzu talking about himself, how he is and how he relates to the world, how he is, in a certain way similar to other people, but in most ways very dissimilar, very different. And he wants to explain what those differences are, and he's not, you'll see it in the chapter that he's not saying that you have to be like me, but he's just saying that this is how I am. So if you were thinking about becoming more like me, this is where you can look to see what those characteristics are. So I'm going to kind of take it slow through this particular chapter, starting with reading this chapter one more time, and then I will go line by line. I know that's what many people are connecting to this meeting to hear, is the line by line, detailed explanation, interpretations of what these lines are. So chapter 20. In English, it says, seize learning, no more worries. Respectful response and scornful response. How much is the difference? Goodness and evil, how much do they differ? What the people fear, I cannot be unafraid. So desolate, how limitless it is. The people are excited, as if enjoying a great feast, as if climbing up to the terrace in spring. I alone am quiet and uninvolved, like an infant not yet smiling. So weary, like having no place to return. The people all have surplus, while I alone seem lacking. I have the heart of a fool indeed, so ignorant. Ordinary people are bright. I alone am muddled. Ordinary people are scrutinizing. I alone am obtuse. Such tranquility like the ocean, such high wind, as if without limits. The people all have gold, and I alone am stubborn and lowly. I alone am different from them and value the nourishing stay strong. So, how's my, okay, audio is back. Knock on wood, hopefully it's going to stay with us. So let me finish making this point. So this universal creating force in Western culture is a father figure. So it's more like an architect, a maker, someone who makes things. It's a male figure who creates the universe out of some raw material, designing it, planning it, shaping it, has a grand plan, God's plan, basically. So God is the Father. This is consistent throughout Western history and Western mythology. So from Nordic mythology, everybody probably has seen the movie, Thor, the first one and the second one. So you know that, Thor's father, Odin, is the All-Father. So that's the supreme deity for that particular mythology. So the matching figure there's also, Zeus as an example. So probably people still remember Hercules, the legendary journeys with Kevin Sorbo. So his father is Zeus. And that's also the male figure. That's the overall dominant supreme deity in that particular pantheon, that particular theology. So, and I say theology instead of mythology because, hey, once upon a time, people really did worship these mythological figures as actual deities. Same for the Nordic mythologies. So that's very consistent in the Western paradigm. In the Eastern paradigm, it's the other way, because the idea is, so it's more goddess than God. It's more a mother figure. It's more a celebration of the feminine essence, which is the life-giving essence. So the idea is that the birth, the creation of the universe is not so much a manufacturing process, but a birthing process. And the birthing process, well, that comes from the female. That doesn't come from, the designer, planner, craftsman, architect, etc. So that's the very last line there. We'll begin with the very end in mind, where Lao Tzu says that, he places supreme value on the nourishing mother, and the nourishing mother is the Tao, called the nourishing mother because it gives birth to all things and it nurtures all things. Now, let's go back to the beginning. So how do we divide this up into different sections? Well, the way that I did it before, and I said that, there's part of it that's really open to question. So this particular division, I've taken as many lines as I can for the top half. However, it's very valid to want to move the line up by 1 or 2 lines. And that is because if you were to, so let me explain. If you were to do the division here, then you've got a section that's asking questions about, this and that, how do they differ, right? Respect, lack of respect, how do they differ? Good, evil, how do they differ? And then you go on to the rest. So you could also put it here, and because this particular line is saying, well, there are similarities between me and people. But then this line says, but then there are also incredible differences. And then it goes on, everything below this point, from 8 onward to the very end, is all about those differences. The difference between me and others, me as in Lao Tzu. So what you can tell, the takeaway from this is that line 6 and line 7 are transition lines. These lines transition from one concrete thought to another group of thoughts that are all related. So above this point, above the point of the transition lines, it's asking about the difference between this and that, different complements. Below the transition lines, it's all about explaining the differences between Lao Tzu and ordinary people. So, so one of the examples that we touched on already and was touched on in Bill's presentation was about the way people are, how they attack, how they criticize, how they will make accusations, oftentimes without basis in reality, and how they bicker among themselves. So a quick comment on that. Oftentimes, people who are new to the Tao express surprise when they encounter this particular aspect of the Tao. That, there are people that bicker, there are people that criticize one another, and then they'll say to me, well, I mean, isn't that ironic? Think about Buddhists or Daoists that, fight and argue and bicker. Isn't that the very opposite of what these paths talk about? Isn't it supposed to be all about peace and harmony? So from that perspective, bickering Buddhists, dogmatic Daoists are sort of like oxymoron, right? Like military intelligence, like jumbo shrimp, like tall dwarfs, short giants, that sort of thing. So let me say that it occurs, it happens because it is part of human nature. There is, if you think about it, it isn't just Asians who practice, Taoism or Buddhism that bicker among themselves, that stray away from the teachings of, peace and tranquility and harmony and so forth. Today, we know already that the conflict in the Middle East is among people, groups of people, one group of which say every single day, all the time to one another, may the peace of Allah be with you. With another group of people that say shalom, which also means peace. So the conflict there is between people who talk about peace every single day to one another every single day. So it's the same situation. So that is how most people are, but that is not how Lao Tzu is, and that is not how real cultivators of the Tao are. So that's the flavor of this entire second half. I want to kind of set that in place, sort of plant the seed in your mind, and then explore that in great detail. So now let's talk about the first few lines. First, let me talk about the meaning. The very first line says, cease learning, no more worries. So if you've been following these lectures week after week, you know that the previous few chapters also talked about this, talked about how to of living life. So one way to think about this is to say, life is something to be lived. It is not something to be studied and obsessed over, but something to be experienced. Okay? Still sticking to the meaning, the second half, let's take a look at 2 and 3. So respectful response, scornful response, how much is the difference? So this is a way to say that notice how most people put a lot of importance on what others say about them, because most everyone is heavily focused on external approval. So if people respect them, praise them, etc., they get a big charge out of it. And if people disapprove, if it's the opposite, they worry about it. What will people think? What will people think of me? So what Lao Tzu is saying is that from the perspective of the Tao cultivator, it is much more important to have internal self-validation. that you review yourself based on your own very honest, very frank and brutal self-knowledge, it's more important to do that than to seek external approval. External approval is fleeting. People may praise you one day and criticize you the next. It may not last, but if you know that what you're doing is right, what you're following is right, you're true to your heart, that's really the thing that matters. So that's the overall meaning there. And then let's take a look at 4 and 5. So goodness and evil, how much do they differ? So here, it's the same line of thought as the previous 2 lines, in that people really spend a lot of time and spend a lot of effort about, who's right, who's wrong, who's good, who's bad, or not so good. Whereas from the Tao perspective, Lao Tzu says, well, for me, I look at the overall situation, and I can see how these valuations will change according to perspective. When I'm over here looking at it this way, it looks good. When I'm looking at it from the other perspective, it looks bad. The exploiter thinks of an enterprise as being good. The exploitive thinks of it as evil, as an example. Many other examples, but basically Lao Tzu is saying that, well, it really depends on which side of the line you happen to be. That's when you think that everybody on your same side is, you're the good guys, and then everybody on the other side, those are the bad guys. Probably an easy way to relate to this is to think about how, when we look at movies like Star Wars, there's good guys and bad guys, there's good versus evil, there's the rebels versus the evil empire. So we think of ourselves, we would identify with the rebels. Those are the good guys. Hey, yeah, I'm with Han Solo and Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia and all that. Then it can be a bit of a shock to realize when you go abroad that people from other countries identify America with the evil empire and themselves with the freedom fighters. So in fiction associated, like, you can get novels associated with Star Wars. You'll see some of that too, in that, for instance, some of them will describe the perspective from the empire, Galactic Empire, saying that the rebel fighters are the terrorists. So there, you have a real life example when you try to compare that with our world today of shifting lines of perceptions when you go from one to the other. All right, so then the next 2 lines require a little more explanation. It's saying that, well, after Lao Tzu just got done talking about the 2 ways in which he thinks differently from most people, people care about praise and criticism. I care about my internal validation. People, really are worried too much about good and evil. I see the different perspectives. When he's done talking about that, he also wants to make it clear that there are aspects. So here in line 6, he's going to say that, well, it's not like I'm beyond human beings. I'm human just like everyone else, and therefore, what people consider to be dangerous or harmful, well, I have to pay attention to that. What's going to kill other people is going to kill me. So I'm only human, just like others. So there's basic similarity between me and others. Then he says, aside from that, though, aside from the basics, the way I see the world, the way I think, it seems so incredibly far apart from that of most people. It's like this landscape that is limitless and desolate, like a desert. The gap between me and them is so vast, is what it's trying to say. And then he goes on to the second section to explain all those differences. So that's the interpretation for the first part, line 1 to line 7. The way to judge interpretation in the Tao Te Ching is to see for yourself that it makes sense from the beginning to end. Every chapter in the Tao Te Ching contains one coherent thought from beginning to end. And the very end, the very beginning and the very end, they should all fit together. So if you aren't getting that, there's something wrong with the interpretation. So I hope to demonstrate and have it make sense for you that everything fits together beautifully in this particular chapter. Okay, so here, before we move on, I want to draw your attention to line 3 and also line 5. So you're going to see that the last character is the same. That just means how much, and the first character is the same. First two characters are the same. So these are both similar ways to say the same thing. How much is the difference versus how much they differ. So you see the translation is a little bit different also, and that matches how the original Chinese characters are a little bit different. That is, out of 4 characters, 3 characters are the same, the third character is different. So it's a slightly different expression in Chinese, talking about the same thing, asking the same question, and therefore in English, it's a slightly different expression in English asking a similar question. Okay. Lastly, before we move on, you'll want to pay attention to this particular chapter, this character, the first character in line 6, 人, that means person or people. So it could be singular, it could be plural. In this particular chapter, it's always going to be plural. So people is the most, people will be, people as it refers to other people or most people or the masses is going to be a recurring theme throughout this entire chapter. Tim, to answer your question about line 6, many people have noted that line 6 seems jarring. Okay, when you look at the interpretation, though, I think it will start to fit together. So I definitely know what you mean, Tim, but follow along for just a moment. I hope to explain that. So let me show everyone the breakdown. So you're going to see some small lines here. You're going to see the first 3 lines. Basically, the first line is the introductory line, continuing thought from before previous chapters, and then 2 and 3 is asking one question, 4 and 5 asking another question, and then we get to the transition lines between the intro section, everything from 1 to 7, to the expression of differences section, which is the bottom half. So that's the division there. Let's move on to another slide. So here we go. Let's take a look at these interpretations from beginning to end. So we're going to just run through them without pause, starting with the first 3 lines. So here's the interpretation. Remember from previous chapters that we should let go of book knowledge. Life is something to be lived, not to be studied and worried over. Okay, that's just line 1. So the only thing that I would reiterate there is to tell everyone that overall the Tao Te Ching is very brief, and therefore anything that gets repeated we have to pay special attention to. So now let's talk about the interpretation for line 2 and 3. People stress over the respect or disrespect that others have for them, but such things make little difference to me, this is Lao Tzu speaking, because my focus is on internal validation, not external approval. Okay? So that's the beginning of Lao Tzu describing the different way he approaches the world. Moving on, we're going to cover the next 3 lines. People also stress over who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. Well, I say, Lao Tzu speaking, I say a lot of all of that depends on which side of the fence you happen to be. Okay, that's different perspectives, giving rise to different opinions, different conclusions. So that covers 4 and 5. And then, and this is the one that's jarring, without interpretation and commentary, it's going to not make a whole lot of sense, but here's the interpretation. I am not setting myself apart from humanity. You know, despite what I said above, I'm not setting myself apart. I am not immune to all the things that people regard as dangerous or harmful. I'm not Superman. In that respect, I am only human, just like everyone else. That sets it up for the next line, where he talks about the dramatic differences that he perceives with other people. So the last line is highlighted. Other than the physical aspects of life and basic issues like survival, I am quite different from most people. I see things differently. I think about things differently. Sometimes the difference is so huge, it is like a desolate, limitless desert. So basically, the rhythm of the first section is difference, difference, similarity, big difference. And then he goes on to explain the big difference. That's the flow. Now, when you look at this section, you're going to also want to start to think about yourself. Okay? You don't have to agree with everything Lao Tzu says. Now, I think it's important for us to study how he thinks and how he looks at the world. Now, I'm not asking you to, end up becoming just like him in the way he describes himself, but I do want you to think about how you differ from other people around you. Because the Tao is still relatively unknown, I know that every day, the great majority, the vast majority of people you encounter are all going to be people who don't have the first clue what you're talking about when you speak on these topics. So, how do they approach life versus how do you approach life? How do they look at life differently versus how you look at life? So I'd like to ask you to think about that. That's going to be in the summary today. So the fourth example leads into a big section to talk about all of those differences. So take a look at all the characters that I have put in red in the second section. You're going to notice that they are the same two characters repeated over and over again. Okay? And then, another slide, I will point out where they're all translated in a consistent way, I alone. So literally the two characters, the first one is me, myself, and I. No other way to translate it. And the second character there is only, alone, the only one. So it could be I'm the only one who, or I am the only one who thinks a particular thing. So out of all the people that Lao Tzu knows, he is the only one who thinks in a certain way, and he explains what that certain way is. Now, he's contrasting himself with other people. And this is where the part that I highlighted with the different background there, those are the depictions. Those are the characters, meaning other people. You're going to notice that most of them are the same, but there's a couple of ones that are different. So line 17, line 19, same. The other ones are the same. So there are two different expressions for other people. So the commonality between them is that character that I pointed out, 人, the character that can mean person, singular, or people, plural, or persons, plural. So this particular line, let's talk about this. Line 6. This is where Lao Tzu is saying that, well, in one aspect, I am not so different, And then he goes on to say, in other aspects, I'm very different. So you're going to notice the same character here at the very end of this line as the same character that's here at the very end of the first group of 4 characters. So again, this means all the people. This means fear. This means apostrophe S. This means what? So altogether, it's what people fear, that which people fear. Okay? Then you're going to notice, so fear is the last character here. You're going to notice that we have 2 similar characters here. This one here, this one here. They're both the same. They both mean the same thing. They mean no. It's pronounced bu, like bu, bu. So if you want to use Chinese, let's just say you go to a Chinese restaurant and the waiter is asking if you want the daily special, but you really have your heart set on something else, you can put this to good use, everybody. You can say bu, and that means no. Of course, your waiter will probably assume that you mean B-O-O. Boo. Am I supposed to be scared? No. In Chinese, boo means no. Okay. The second character there means can. So if you put it together, it's no can. No can is cannot, could not. And then boo, again, means no, and then fear. So, 不畏, no fear. So, literally, it's cannot, no fear. Well, what does that mean? Well, you cannot be unafraid is what it really means. So, let's see. So, Tim, to answer your question about the translation, it's this is actually one of the easiest lines to translate because all the characters are very well understood, and the way that they're put together don't leave a whole lot of room for interpretation for this particular case. But then again, to reiterate, I think that once you see the overall flow, small difference, similarity, big difference, and then explaining the big difference. I think that's when you understand the flow, it flows better. It doesn't stand out like a sore thumb, which it does if you just look at the translation without the commentary and the interpretation. Okay, so so moving on. So you can probably just imagine that we're about to delve into all of these sections that talk about the great similarities between Laozi and other people. So, like we did with the first section, let me focus on the meaning first to make sure that everybody is okay with the meaning. There's a lot of symbologies being utilized, a lot of metaphors, and I want to make sure everyone is clear on exactly what they are, what they stand for. Okay, so let's begin with the first. Well, I think let me see if we have another couple of slides that'll make it easier. Here I am highlighting the translation, 众人, the people. So you'll notice consistency in the way that it's translated. For these 2 characters, it's always the people. And then we have a different translation here for the different characters, 俗人, ordinary people. Okay, so the people, ordinary people, and then back to the people again. And that matches how the original Chinese characters change. So these are the sections. So we'll take these one section at a time. So the very first difference that Laozi is noting is that the people are excited. This is sort of the ancient Chinese way of saying that, most people, how they are. They're party people. Of course, in ancient China, they did not have a nightclub where the DJ is going to say, party people, okay, but they enjoy excitement, they like to socialize, they were party people without necessarily calling themselves party people. So, second line there, as if enjoying a great feast, okay, this is where, this is referring to the feast itself is referring to food, but also expanded to cover sensory pleasures, just like eating is a pleasure to the senses. Until you eat too much, then it's not as much a pleasure. But people are really into that. They're into excitement, fun. They're into sensory pleasures, delights. So climbing up to the terrace in spring, okay, so this is a group activity that in springtime, people will hike up to, a terrace in a nearby mountain where they can take in a spectacular view of the surrounding area. So this is a metaphorical for a group activity. So no nightclubs in ancient China, but they had the group hikes. So that's how most people are. They're really into thrills, excitement, pleasures. Compared to them, Lao Tzu says, I alone am different from them. I like it quiet. They like to make a lot of noise. I prefer being quiet. And I prefer to not be involved with all that. So Lao Tzu says, like an infant, not yet smiling. This is a way to say that my needs are very basic. The infant just requires food and rest, pretty much it. So he's saying that my needs are not elaborate. I don't need those socializing events. I don't need all that excitement. I like it quiet. So right off the bat, I'll probably have people who say that, but Derek, I really like parties. I don't want to be like Lao Tzu. So that's totally fine. Now remember, as Lao Tzu wrote this, he was like 70-something, 80-something. So his partying days were long behind him. He used to be the librarian, the royal archivist at the palace. So I don't know to what extent, as a younger man, that he got involved in the palace parties, but probably not a whole lot. So then, in the last line there, so weary, like having no place to return. This is to say that in comparison, in contrast with all the people that are socializing, chatting with one another, having a good time, he is so tired of all that socializing, all that gossiping, all those social interactions. Everyone that's involved in that sort of activities, it's like they belong with the crowd. And in comparison to them, Lao Tzu says, it's like I don't belong anywhere. So this is like the ultimate introvert, basically, is the way that Lao Tzu explains himself. So, okay, that's one difference. How about another one? The people all have surplus, while I alone seem lacking. At the heart of a fool indeed, so ignorant. So this is where Lao Tzu is talking about the things, material possessions that people have, that they all seem to have way more than they need. That's the surplus. That their lives are cluttered up with many items. And they feel good about that. People feel good about having a lot more than they need. They're proud of their clutter. So Lao Tzu is different from them because Lao Tzu wants to live the minimalist life, a life that is as simplistic as possible, without all the extras, without all the clutter. And therefore, people will look at him and then feel like, well, he seems to be lacking quite a few things in life. Why does he have so little? Having more, that's a sign of wealth and prosperity and abundance, right? He's got so little. He's got the very opposite of prosperity and abundance, and so on. So people would regard him as being quite foolish. So these ancient sages, they're very well treated. They're constantly being approached with offers of wealth, power, position, but then a lot of them will be uninterested. A lot of them, like Zhuangzi, will be like, well, thanks, but no thanks. I have everything that I need. I like my life. I don't need this, highly visible job, high-profile job to be in the palace advising the king, as an example. I don't really need that. And everyone is going to look at that and say, gee, passing up such a huge opportunity, that's a little bit foolish. So quite a few more differences to talk about, but I think you get the flavor of this, and we're approaching the time that we should be ending our meeting today. So let me do a quick preview for you on what we're going to talk about next time. When we're done with all the different sections, I'll summarize everything in this interpretation here about how most people are and how Laozi is. The way he looks at the world, the way he thinks, the way he lives, what his goals are, etc. Very different from most people. So this will be the summary of the second section. Then the summary of the meeting today is a series of questions for you. Questions to contemplate. Let me run through them with you. We have a couple more minutes, so let me run through them. How much importance do you place on the good opinion of others? And more importantly, we're talking about moderation, we're talking about balance and equilibrium. The other important question, how much importance do you place on the good opinion of others is appropriate? Okay, so notice that I'm not saying you should completely disregard the good opinion of others. Why do I say that? Even the ancient sages have talked about this, to say that oftentimes we cannot rely on our own perceptions because it's only one perspective and we have mental blind spots. We may not be able to see everything. So occasionally we need to make sure we know how other people see it. You wouldn't want the opinion of other people to overwhelm your own or to be the only thing that you rely on, and then you are basically putting yourself at their whims and dictates. Instead, you want to incorporate, you want to validate, you want to make sure that you are not too far off the mark by calibrating your opinions against that of other people. That's the first question. Then, can you envision the possibility of a radical shift in your perspective of good and evil? What if you were to find yourself, think about a dramatic presentation, like a television show or a movie, where someone who discovers belatedly that he was actually adopted, he actually came from a different background, and the background, he's actually the son of people that he's sworn to battle, and now he feels divided loyalties. His sense of good and evil, right or wrong, suddenly gets turned upside down. What are the possibilities that can radically shift your perspective on that? What if you were to learn more about the other side that you thought was bad? Would that change the way you think? What is it like to be in their shoes? What if you were stuck in that role, and you have no choice but to live that life? Would it change you? And then this question here in the middle, what does it mean to be cautious yet carefree? This is something that I'll talk about more next time, because when you look at the line, when you read the line that says what the people fear, I cannot be unafraid. I have to fear what other people fear. That's depicting a very cautious mindset. So I want to challenge you by asking you, hey, aren't we supposed to be carefree? Doesn't the Tao talk about carefree wandering? So if you're fearful, how can you be carefree? So that's my challenge to you. Then the question that I asked a little bit earlier today, how are you different from the people you know who do not share your interest in the Tao? How are you different? Lastly, this last question is going to be the one that's repeated next time because we haven't talked about all the different differences yet from Lao Tzu and other people. So, but I would ask you to start thinking about this in your own words. Do you have the ability to describe the characteristics that Lao Tzu used to describe himself? So where are you similar to Lao Tzu? And where you are not similar, which ones would you like to cultivate more of? So a lot of challenges because this is a thought-provoking chapter, chapter 20. So probably a lot of homework assignment in terms of what you have to do to think about yourself in relation to this particular chapter. So I'm going to leave it on that note for now. We're a couple of minutes over. Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持下三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持下各位点传师一。